The day started early, with the sun barely peeking over the horizon as I made my way to Mike's house. There was a quiet stillness in the air, the kind of calm that only exists in the early hours before the world wakes up. As I walked up the driveway, I could see that the house was already bustling with activity. Cars lined the street, and through the open windows, I could hear the sounds of laughter, conversation, and the occasional barked order as last-minute preparations were made. When I stepped inside, the first thing that hit me was the smell of coffee and breakfast. The kitchen was a hive of activity, with people darting in and out, carrying trays of food, cups of coffee, and various other items needed to fuel the morning. Mike's mom, a whirlwind of energy, was at the center of it all, making sure everyone was fed and that everything was running smoothly. She greeted me with a hug and a cup of coffee, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Morning. You're just in time," she said, handing me the cup. "The boys are upstairs getting ready. Go on up and say hi." I thanked her and made my way up the stairs, the sounds of laughter growing louder as I approached. When I entered Mike's room, I was met with the sight of organized chaos. His groomsmen were scattered around the room, some half-dressed, others fully ready, but all of them in high spirits. There were ties draped over chairs, jackets hanging on bedposts, and shoes lined up neatly by the door. It was clear that everyone was excited, but there was also a sense of nervous energy in the air. Mike was standing by the window, looking out over the backyard. He was already dressed in his suit, his tie slightly askew as he fiddled with the cufflinks on his shirt. When he saw me, he broke into a wide grin. "Hey, man, you made it," he said, crossing the room to give me a hug. "How are you feeling?" I asked, stepping back to take a good look at him. He looked sharp in his suit, but there was a telltale gleam of nervousness in his eyes. "Honestly, a little bit of everything," he admitted with a chuckle. "Excited, nervous, happy, terrified. It's all kind of hitting me at once." "That's how it's supposed to be," I said with a smile. "But don't worry, everything's going to be perfect. You and Sarah have been waiting for this day for a long time." He nodded, a soft smile spreading across his face. "Yeah, we have. I just can't believe it's finally here." We spent the next hour getting ready, the room filled with the sound of laughter, teasing, and the occasional clink of a glass as we toasted to Mike and his impending marriage. As we tied ties, adjusted jackets, and made sure everyone looked their best, there was a shared sense of camaraderie that made the moment feel special. We were all here for Mike, to support him on one of the biggest days of his life, and that sense of brotherhood was palpable. Once everyone was ready, we headed downstairs, where the rest of the household was in full swing. Mike's family was gathering in the living room, ready to head to the venue, and there was a palpable buzz of excitement in the air. His mom was fussing over him, straightening his tie and making sure he had everything he needed, while his dad gave him a firm pat on the back, his eyes filled with pride. "Ready to go, son?" his dad asked, his voice gruff with emotion. Mike nodded, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, Dad, I'm ready." With that, we all piled into cars and headed to the venue. The drive was short, but it felt like time slowed down as we made our way through the familiar streets. Mike was quiet during the ride, lost in his thoughts, but there was a peacefulness about him that made me smile. He was ready for this, more ready than I had ever seen him. As we pulled up to the estate, the sight that greeted us was nothing short of breathtaking. The garden was in full bloom with flowers of every color imaginable. The grand old mansion stood proudly in the background, its windows reflecting the morning sunlight. A team of wedding planners was already hard at work, putting the finishing touches on the setup, and as we stepped out of the car, we were immediately greeted by a flurry of activity. The guests began to arrive shortly after we did, and the atmosphere quickly shifted from one of quiet anticipation to one of joyous celebration. The garden filled with people, all dressed in their finest, chatting excitedly as they waited for the ceremony to begin. There were smiles and laughter everywhere I looked, and it was clear that everyone was thrilled to be there. As the groom's party, We had the responsibility of making sure everything was in place. We checked in with the wedding planner, made sure the flowers were arranged perfectly, and ensured that everyone knew where they were supposed to be. There was a moment of panic when one of the bridesmaids realized she had left her bouquet in the car, but it was quickly retrieved, and the crisis was averted. It was in those moments of small chaos that the reality of the day set in. This wasn't just any day. It was a day that Mike and Sarah would remember for the rest of their lives. When it was finally time for the ceremony to begin, the energy in the garden shifted once again. The guests took their seats, the soft murmur of conversation dying down as the music began to play. Mike and the groomsmen took their places at the front, and I could see the tension in Mike's shoulders as he waited for Sarah to appear. And then, there she was. Sarah stepped out from the mansion, her arm linked with her father's, and began her walk down the aisle. The sight of her took my breath away. She looked absolutely radiant, her dress flowing around her like a cloud, her smile brighter than the sun. There was a collective intake of breath from the guests as they turned to watch her, and for a moment, it felt as if time had stopped. As Sarah reached the end of the aisle and took Mike's hand, I could see the emotion in both of their eyes. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the culmination of years of love and commitment. The officiant began to speak, his voice warm and full of emotion, and I could feel the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. The vows they exchanged were simple but powerful, each word filled with meaning and love. They spoke of the life they had built together, the challenges they had faced, and the future they were so excited to share. There were tears in Sarah's eyes as she spoke, and Mike's voice wavered with emotion as he responded. It was a beautiful, raw, and honest moment, and by the time they finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, the guests erupted into applause, the sound filling the garden with joy. Mike and Sarah turned to face their friends and family, their faces glowing with happiness, and in that moment, it was clear that this was exactly where they were meant to be. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of celebration. The reception was held under a grand tent on the estate's lawn, the space transformed into a wonderland of lights, flowers, and music. The tables were adorned with elegant centerpieces, the air filled with the scent of roses and fresh greenery. The wedding cake, a towering creation of white and gold, stood proudly in the center of the room, a testament to the love and effort that had gone into planning this day. The speeches that followed were heartfelt and emotional. Mike's best man, his childhood friend, delivered a speech that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. He spoke of their years growing up together, the mischief they had gotten into, and how he had always known that Mike and Sarah were meant to be. Sarah's maid of honor, her sister, followed with a speech that was equally touching, speaking of the bond they shared and how she had never seen her sister as happy as she was with Mike. Dinner was a feast, with a menu that catered to every taste. The food was exquisite, each dish more delicious than the last, and as the plates were cleared away, the dance floor was opened. Mike and Sarah shared their first dance as husband and wife to a soft, romantic tune, their movements graceful and full of love. As they danced, the guests gathered around, watching with smiles on their faces, some swaying gently to the music. As the night wore on, the atmosphere grew more relaxed, the formalities giving way to pure celebration. The dance floor was packed with guests, young and old, all caught up in the joy of the moment. Laughter rang out across the garden, mingling with the music and the clinking of glasses. It was a night of pure joy, a night where everything felt perfect, and as I watched Mike and Sarah move through the crowd, their faces glowing with happiness, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. It was in the quiet moments between the festivities, when the music faded and the night grew still, that the reality of the day truly set in. Mike and Sarah were now husband and wife. their journey together officially beginning. They had faced so much to get to this point, and now, surrounded by the people who loved them most, they were ready to face whatever came next. As the evening came to a close, and the guests began to make their way home, there was a palpable sense of fulfillment in the air. The day had been everything Mike and Sarah had hoped for and more, a perfect beginning to the next chapter of their lives. When I finally said my goodbyes and headed to my car, I found myself pausing for a moment looking back at the estate. The lights were still twinkling in the trees, the sound of music and laughter fading into the distance. I knew that this day would stay with me forever, a memory etched into my heart, a reminder of the power of love and the joy that comes from sharing it with those who matter most. Mike and Sarah's wedding was more than just a celebration of their love. It was a celebration of life, of friendship, and of the bonds that connect us all. And as I drove home that night, the stars shining brightly in the sky above, I couldn't help but feel grateful to have been a part of it.